Thus the Round the Kaguya DLC has finally settled, a new format has evolved. Let's talk about the immense impact this update had on Naruto to Boruto Shinobi Striker. Flower Cannon has a bigger range and a heal over time effect for your teammates now. This jutsu is especially useful in a team comp with high burst damage jutsus. You increase their ninjutsu damage and reduce their cooldowns, so they now have stronger jutsus and also have them more often. Pair that with some defense drops on your team from a Sulock or flame control for example, maybe even throw in a black crane or blue flash outfit on one of your mates and you're just gonna one-shot people like crazy. Besides high burst damage or one-shot strategies, this jutsu also really goes well with high self-sustain builds that run self-heal moves like Ripple for example, where you heal yourself based on the damage you deal with the jutsu. You heal more with every jutsu and also have these heals more often, so it synergizes pretty well, especially since the heal over time now comes on top of that too. They lowered the cooldown of Hard Light to 18 seconds and added a defense buff to it. The 100 Healings ultimate now also gives you a tracking buff. It's a nice buff, but it's still one of the weaker ults in the game. Yasaka beats now can be punished earlier since they reduced the duration of its invincibility. Flame Formation went up to a 30-second cooldown and also gives a lower defense buff than before. Bring Down the House Jutsu does more damage now, and they decreased the cooldown of Toad Oil Bomb to 12 seconds, as well as increasing its damage and lowering the time it blocks enemy jutsus. It now also stuns people, which makes it great for combos. If you hit your enemy at a certain height, you can even stun them long enough to let the combo counter run out mid-combo. Wind Scythe Jutsu has a lower cooldown and the tornadoes are faster now, but they won't break guard anymore. Summoning Blade Dance is faster and has a lower cooldown now, but they reduced its tracking. The 1000 Needles of Death received a lower cooldown as well, and the trap is also active for longer. Which means you can now theoretically stack multiple of those on top of each other or just spread a bunch of them all over the objective. Multiple Striking Shadow Snake deals more poison damage now. Listen, it's really good DPS. You do like 40% damage with one cast if you run increased status element duration. It goes through walls, has a good knockback that is pretty quick in execution, and since most of it is status damage, your opponent can't really block it. But to be honest, don't get me wrong, it's not a bad jutsu, but we have so many things that remove status ailments that it's oftentimes not really going through. I mean, it has a lower cooldown than its counters, but with so much counterplay and the fact that a lot of it gets out healed since it's damage over time, they could maybe just give it super armor during the execution, or reduce the poison damage in exchange for higher damage on the initial hit, so you still have about the same damage but less of it can be denied by removing the debuff. They could also just increase the number of hits so it's easier to proc the multi-hit accessories with it. One of the most impactful changes we ever had is that they lowered the tracking buff on Oboe and increased the damage of the Shuriken on the callback. It is still an absolutely great jutsu that provides lots of buffs and utility. It's still one of the best combo extenders in the entire game, but this tracking nerf really shook up the meta. But to make up for it, they added a similar tracking buff to Teleportation Jutsu, so now that is where the Oboe Sweat's gonna get their tracking buff from. This move already was meta in flag battles, it always had a lot of utility, movement speed, jutsu damage buff, iframes, low cooldown movement ability, all of that. But now it's just one of the best jutsus in the game for any game mode really. Same thing could be said about Almighty Push. It has always been a good jutsu, I don't think it needed a buff, but I'm glad it got one anyways. It was really time to finally see something else online than just Oboe with dynamic entry. Simply increasing the range of it was all it took to make this jutsu an absolute beast. 11-second cooldown, good AoE damage, guard breaks, crowd control, and it also breaks and interrupts a lot of jutsus and also just synergizes so well with teleportation. Kodo Amatsukami has a longer cooldown now, and Swift Step also has a lower tracking buff now. So if you still wanna zoom around like people used to do with Oboe, you're gonna have to bring your teleportation or your blue flash medicine instead of your Oboe and Swift Step now. Claws got nerfed, the air lights don't subblock anymore, and to be honest they should have never done that in the first place, because the heavy attacks are supposed to do that, not the light attacks. And then they also adjusted the stun animation people get from the heavy attack of claws, so it's now harder to connect them. That's especially true for the chakra claws, but to make up for that they increased the damage of their heavy attacks. I mean, you can still kind of connect two heavies using a dash cancel, but really only if the stars align and it's perfectly executed and everything. But basically, if you want to subblock somebody to death with chakra claws, now you're gonna have to bring some simple extenders like Paralysis Kunai or Octo Hug, but it is still very much possible, okay? The higher damage actually means that you can now kill heal and range types in 2 or 3 heavy attacks if you have the right clothing perks. Yeah, your light attacks don't subblock anymore, yeah, your heavy spam is more difficult now, but to be honest, neither of these things is what makes the claws so good. The problem with the claws has been and still is the range of their combo starter, so no worries, claws are still a top tier weapon. They actually did a similar thing with the Asuma Knuckle Knives, where they drastically reduced the stun time of the air heavy. Now, the problem with the Asuma Knuckle Knives is that they have a really mean combo starter on their air heavy. It's really quick and you would usually hit first against most other weapons, and then it also led into a tumble animation where the enemy kind of rolled when hitting the ground, so it was a very strong startup that also had a long hit stun and that could just be nuked to sublock people easily. Here is the thing, it got nerfed, but in reality it didn't get much weaker at all, because what they didn't do is adjust the hit stun animation of the second input of the air heavy that leads into the same kind of hit stun. So basically the only difference is that now when you dash in, you press triangle 2 times instead of 1 time to get them to the ground. And the ground heavy still works the same, so we can still just do an infinite sublock combo with that as well. So you would just press triangle, dash, triangle and so on, instead of just looping the jump heavy. It's literally just 2 buttons that are different now, but it's basically the same bullshit. And I mean, if you have no issues getting somebody sub before you do a combo, because you can actually set up a fight properly, you can always just use the triple lights in the air for the same kind of drop down. So yeah, if anyone tries to tell you claws or knuckles aren't good anymore or anything like that, you know they have never been good with the weapon in the first place. Because all the things that really made these weapons so dominant are still there. Online friends will now be at the top of your in-game friend list. That's a major quality of life improvement in my opinion. We also got the new map, which is basically just a game lobby, and they also changed the whole shop system. You basically get way more SS items across the board. I have a whole video on that topic as well. It should appear on your screen right now. Peace out and never forget, if it has a health bar, it has to die.